You're listening to the Assembly on Environmental, Occupational, and Population Health podcast, brought to you by the American Thoracic Society.
Hello and welcome to this podcast from the ATS Environmental, Occupation, and Population Health Assembly, to be referred to as EOPH from now on. I'm Dr. Joanne McKell, an assistant professor at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine, and I'm pleased to introduce Silpa Krefft, MD, MPH, from the University of Colorado, Anschutz Medical Campus. And she's also the site director for the Post-Deployment Cardiopulmonary Evaluation Network that is part of the Veterans Health Administration. Welcome, Dr. Krefft.
Hi, thank you for having me, Dr. McKell. It's great to be here.
Great. Today we're previewing the EOPH-related programming that will be available at the American Thoracic Society International Conference. And Dr. Krefft is an expert in military deployment exposure-related lung disease, and she's also worked with silicosis and coal mining-related lung disease. For the record, I have no conflicts of interest and nothing to declare. Dr. Krefft, welcome. And do you have any conflicts of interest related to this topic?
No conflicts of interest, except that I do some medical legal consulting in occupational lung disease.
Okay. All right. So let's get started. This is very exciting. The programs will be from May 17th through the 22nd, and they're all coming up. I know you've done a lot of work. Just for background, explain what a program committee chair does.
Sure. I would say it's actually a pretty large team effort. So as program committee chair, you actually work with the chair-elect too, which is a really great training kind of experience for a whole year before you actually assume the role of chair of the program committee. So for EOPH, I'm serving currently as the chair, and then our program committee chair-elect, Tara Nordgren, who's also an associate professor at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, shares some of these duties with me, and a lot of it ends up becoming kind of split between a couple of things. The transition actually occurs during the American Thoracic Society conference. So our program committee meeting occurs at ATS, where there's a lot of brainstorming about things that, are kind of new and emerging, getting feedback from conference attendees about what they'd like to see in the future year, and really trying to bring together people and network to get those submissions in for programming for the next year's conference. So the EOPH program chair takes over those programming responsibilities at the time of the International Conference Committee meeting. I don't know that if that many of the ATS members know about the ICC meeting, but that's usually on the last day of the American Thoracic Society conference. And the ICC actually determines all of the programming for the ATS conference. So each assembly has some membership and representation there. So both the EOPH chair and chair-elect attend that conference. Mostly, we think about three big deadlines in terms of workload for the program committee, trying to get scientific symposiums rated, scored, and selected in early summer, scientific abstracts in late October or early November, depending on the year, and then late-breaking abstracts at the end of January or early February. There's actually monthly responsibilities afterward where the chair and chair-elect are attending monthly EOPH executive committee meetings, these ICC meetings in August and December to program all of the conference content related to the assembly, selection of travel scholarships based on abstract grades, and then, of course, inviting facilitators and speakers for conference sessions.
Hey, wow, that's a lot of work. ICC International Conference Committee, or what does ICC stand for?
Yes, ICC is the International Conference Committee, and the incoming chair for that is actually Jennifer Taylor Kauser, and outgoing chair is Dr. Deborah Boyer, who I think is from Rainbow Babies Hospital in Cleveland, actually. So they are responsible for the entirety of the conference programming, and there's, as I mentioned, representation from each of the assembly chairs and chair-elects at these meetings where we are trying to get programming scheduled and racing for some of the best days, best times, basically.
Okay, wow, I am sure it is one of those herding cats kind of things, because it's a process of ideas and then you have to funnel them all into a pretty organized program. And I'm very glad to hear that you do have a chair-elect Tara who's helping you with this program. That's a lot. So just to kind of clarify, the ideas are coming from members of the ATS. The ideas, also there's brainstorming at the ICC meeting. And then once an idea takes hold, is it something that is kind of cast in stone? I shouldn't say stone, but let's say wet cement from May through the fall, I mean, from May, say 2024 through 2025, or are there places to insert new ideas and new programming between one conference and the other?
Yeah, I think there are some multiple points of kind of entry, but I would say that a lot of the brainstorming takes place in May just because when we think about the scientific symposia, like you submit your proposal and each assembly has different kind of allocation. So based on membership and the abstract submitted, this is what kind of determines how many scientific symposia we have. So we're kind of a small to medium sized assembly, and we often get the chance for 3 scientific symposia to be scheduled. So this is where there's kind of a race because the scientific symposia are the first things that we get scheduled. So in May, it's trying to get some ideas of what we think would be broadly appealing to membership, and then even the broader ATS membership in general, how to get people to kind of come and maybe do a session in EOPH. So even if things are not selected as one of those top 3 scientific symposia, actually, I think this is something I didn't really learn until I became a program committee chair, is that the chair-elect and the program committee chair can actually rescue some of the, we had 11 submissions this past year for only 3 spots. And so much of the content was important, but maybe not rated as high just in terms of like broad appeal. And so that's where you can kind of rescue this proposal and see if you can submit it again as a jointly sponsored session, basically. So this is where the chair and chair-elect have to kind of revise the proposal, find a co-sponsoring assembly, and then submit again through another competitive process where at the ICC meeting in August, everybody is voting on what they think would be great joint sessions. We were fortunate to have 2 joint sessions selected this year in our programming, which, it's hard to kind of even tell the difference between that and the original scientific symposia.
Mhm.
And also were approached by Thoracic Oncology about co-sponsoring a session with them on lung cancer screening, really thinking beyond smoking risk factors. So, this is an opportunity. So again, a little bit after the regular deadline, kind of in the July, August timeframe, to look at ways to kind of do interdisciplinary kind of programming. And then, of course, during the late breaking abstracts, I think we kind of think about abstracts as being organized into poster discussion sessions or thematic poster sessions. But we actually do put together, we actually do get slots for mini symposia, especially if we see a lot of themes related to certain kinds of posters. We can organize that into a symposia too. So there are these multiple points of entry to, get kind of an oral presentation and kind of rework themes so that it's not just one poster, but really a session around a potential topic.
Right. Wow. So you have to be creative. In fact, I noticed I liked some of the names of the sessions. Did you come up with the names? There was one like Smoke, Fire, and Health, which I reminded me of a cookbook, actually. Did you come up with some of those themes? Or-
Our predecessors, Mary Rice and Peggy Lai, were, I think, a little bit much more creative than me, but we did come up with these names with the assistance of Chat GPT. I
Oh,
think you can kind of say, like, we're not allowed to use Chat GPT for anything beyond things like titles, obviously. So no abstract content or anything we're going in there. But if we saw certain themes, we would ask for, give us a sexy name for, occupational lung disease, environmental exposures, and these different things. And try again over and over again. You can probably see some themes even in the way things are organized, but the Chat GPT, but that was the extent of our use of Chat GPT, just to help us with titles.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get into some of these sessions because there's a lot that are
Yeah.
interesting. Did you notice any emerging topics that you had a lot of applications or proposals for
Yes.
this
Yeah.
coming conference?
I think one of the ones that really kind of stood out, like in terms of emerging, that we haven't seen in some of our previous conference sessions, at least in terms of like a dedicated session, was microplastics. There's been a lot of concerns and questions about microplastics in the environment. And so it was exciting to see that in one of the scientific symposia. So we did actually include that. So I think that that will be something of interest and hopefully will generate some further discussion and kind of work in that area. Also, last year, there was a keynote session on One Health, and Dr. George Anisi really kind of ran with some of the One Health approach and brought in a very interdisciplinary, actually jointly sponsored session. Like, it's interesting to get EOPH, critical care, behavioral, like health, like all of these assemblies together to kind of look at how we kind of approach emerging pandemics, basically. So that was another session that seemed to be interesting. I think what I'd like to see more of is some of these inter-assembly sessions in the future. And I think an area we could maybe look to that is maybe epigenetics and omics.
Yeah, that would be very interesting. So, anybody in the audience who wants to propose inter-assembly sessions, your time is coming. Great. Does the conference work more with basic science, more with translational science, or if multiple branches, how do you try to bridge the gap between all the different branches of research and also the clinical part of lung health?
Yeah. I think that's a challenge, at ATS in the sense that there's just so much content that it can be hard for someone to get the breadth of experience of all of those offerings. There is, and you'll see this as the EOPH newsletter comes out, but there is a basic science core track. There were some concerted efforts, especially in poster discussion sessions or some of the mini symposia, to focus a little bit more on mechanistic or basic, or like kind of bench science work, basically. And then others that are a little bit more clinical translational or more clinical and epidemiologically focused. So
Mhm.
you'll really see a combination of those. While it's not always possible to not have some of these conflicting sessions, somebody who's really interested in the basic science track may, be interested in two different topics that might unfortunately be occurring at the same session. But I think that the EOPH newsletter will help to kind of organize that. So as soon as that comes out, I would, if you're kind of planning a conference around that, take a look at it. And then I guess this is a plug for something that what I saw last year, but as the chair-elect last year, I was really interested to see what is a lot of our membership find of interest. And interestingly, while I thought certain things were not maybe as popular, maybe occupational lung disease wasn't as broadly appealing, or that air pollution was actually more broadly appealing, I saw some similar attendance in many of the sessions, and maybe the day that a session happened dictated a lot more of the attendance.
Mhm.
So this is one of those things where I had discovered the on-demand feature for the scientific symposium and sessions. And for the things that I missed, was able to take a look at that. If you were attending the conference in person, there is actually an option to add on a feature. For members, it's $50. For non-members, it's $75 to add that. And I felt less FOMO after, after having that. I think there was really some other great sessions, and that is probably a way to kind of bridge that there's, I would say that there's content on basic science, the clinical translational, the epi, all of this stuff. It's more about, will you have time to see all of this? And so, certain times I was able to kind of spend in poster discussion sessions or thematic sessions, and then be a little bit more selective about the scientific symposia because I knew that those would be on demand and that I had access to that. So just something to consider as you're planning and trying to figure out how to get the most out of ATS this year.
Yeah, I actually always get the on-demand option too. It's just a very $50 is it's not chump change, but it is a good investment and it saved me because at the time I sometimes don't really know what I want. And then as my brain kind of latches onto one thing or another, I'm like, oh, I missed that session. And of course, there's always the ones that are scheduled at the same time. I did want to talk, I know that you have a little experience working with some diagnostic modalities. Have you noticed that the researchers or other, people who are proposing sessions have been using newer diagnostic modalities to understand lung disease development, either in uh, pediatrics or in adult lung disease?
I think so. I think there's always been an interest in things like quantitative imaging, certain kinds of biomarkers in kind of blood and other lung tissue, as well as even in physiologic testing. Some kind of older tests that have been kind of dusted off and being repurposed as maybe more sensitive markers of lung disease, like oscillometry or multiple breath
Mhm.
nitrogen washout. So I think that because these modalities have had some dedicated sessions before in the past, or sometimes even in other assemblies. But I think that one of the sessions that we have is happening on, I believe, on Monday, exploring novel diagnostics and interventions to improve lung health. So I think that is worth checking out. That's a thematic poster session, so it doesn't really conflict with many of the poster discussions or the scientific symposia. We also have a poster discussion session called Unmasking Mechanisms of Exposure-Related Inflammation and Lung Disease. And this really ties together both occupational and environmental exposure. So I think this will be helpful too, that it is nice to have some of this focus, but also to cross-pollinate, to do some cross-talk,
Mhm.
between people who maybe do air pollution and then maybe some of the environmental exposures or, some of the indoor air quality exports. So I
Yeah.
think that those are things to particularly check out.
Okay. Actually, I have noticed that there are a few air pollution impact sessions going on. Anything you wanted to discuss in the realm of air pollution and its lung health impact?
Yes, there's actually a couple of sessions there. So, starting with like Sunday, there's addressing challenges of air pollution for better lung health outcomes. So, I think this is something that this is a thematic poster session with broad topics. We have a great facilitator who I think is also involved in the medical education track. So, some of this is also not just addressing these challenges, but how to disseminate this. So, I think that's a session to check out. There is a midday session actually that I think would be great. It's called Using NASA Satellite Data to Guide Novel Air Quality Applications. So we'll be fortunate to have, speakers from NASA talking about not only the applications of this, but how, if you're interested in, using some of this, using this application, how to access it. So I think thinking of this as a research tool available to people all over the US and world, I think that that is of particular interest. Um, and then we also have we only have one rapid poster discussion session that's allotted to us. So those are unique, where there's up to 15 posters, where each person will come up and do like a 90-second description of a slide, and then there'll be time to ask questions. So 10 fewer posters than what we have in a typical poster discussion session. And this year that has been given to really kind of the smoke, what we're calling smoke, heat, and health, lung disease, and the age of climate change and wildfires. I think, with every year that goes by, this is increasingly becoming more and more important. Um, in kind of really any part of the US or out,
Mhm.
internationally, as we saw a lot from the Canadian wildfires, in previous years. So we have a facilitator, Dr. Chandler from NASA, Dr. Zellbaron, who's an epidemiologist. I think a really great facilitator team for that too. So I think that's a session to check out. And then the last one I kind of wanted to highlight there was just a scientific symposium, one of our very high scoring ones, from air to ailments, understanding the impact of airborne pollutants and particulate matter from different sources on health. So, really more broad than just the wildfire aspect.
I wanted to also follow up that you had mentioned One Health. Can you explain a little bit about One Health? I know that it's multidisciplinary. Georgia Nisi, who is involved in it, is also the terrorism, inhalational, and disaster section head. And so it's kind of interesting to follow his progress through the session
Yes.
as well.
Right. So, there are probably other people could speak to this even better than I can from One Health, but just in terms of like thinking not only kind of in like a human model, basically, some of our colleagues in veterinary medicine are seeing many of the same problems that face us in human health. So I think kind of One Health is more of kind of a holistic approach of bridging all of these resources and having us, is kind of solve these problems and tackle these problems together. So one of so I would say that, kind of incorporating more of this interspecies kind of approach and interdisciplinary approach is one way to kind of think about, especially as we start to understand emerging infectious diseases,
Mhm.
kind of seeing what has happened, not only in human populations, but also in other animal populations. So that's one way to kind of think about it, One Health, but just I think a more integrated approach at understanding the problems around us. I can tell you one of the anecdotes I had heard, a large proponent of One Health and kind of One Health approaches and research is Dr. Jennifer Taylor Kauser, who is the incoming International Conference Committee Chair. And she actually was the keynote facilitator last year at this session. And she herself has had experiences where she had helped to take care of a orangutan that had cystic fibrosis, and
Oh,
bronchiectasis, for I think it was for at the Denver Zoo. So had some of these experience. So using what she had learned kind of in the human population. So thinking a little bit more in that kind of global and open-minded role. So.
okay. Wow, it's something definitely to look forward to. Anything else you want to promote at the conference? Anything that is exciting
Yeah,
to you?
I would I would say that a couple of other things to kind of think about are I mentioned already the microplastic session, but we've always been kind of interested in thinking about social determinants of health, kind of health disparities, and in some of our sessions you'll see that is discussed but maybe not completely highlighted. But we do have some sessions that talk a little bit more about this. One of the things that I thought would be helpful too, actually, was the community engagement piece. So there is a session, unfortunately, it's on Wednesday, but it's in the morning, called Community Engagement for Pulmonary and Environmental Health Research, Lessons Learned from Community Partners, Site Access, and Recruitment, like how to, engage to do the research, to do kind of dissemination of research findings to communities. And so I think this is something like a little bit more that gives you examples of how things have been implemented before in the past. Another thing I wanted to, as somebody who's an occupational pulmonologist and spends a lot of time looking at exposure-related lung disease, we so in terms of occupational lung disease, we, instead of just doing one big theme, kind of looked at several different kinds of themes in occupational medicine. So we have a session called Beyond the Dust. It's a scientific symposium, Advancing Exposure Assessment, Metabolomics, and Treatment in Occupational Lung Diseases, that covers topics from military deployment of lung disease to coal miners with silicosis and engineered stone cutters, asbestos. I mean, really a wide group of topics. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that session. That is a mini symposium on Sunday at 9:15. And then I think the last thing to kind of say, we have many other great sessions I didn't kind of mention, is that we have postgraduate courses. We have one on occupational lung disease on Saturday. We also have a Meet the Expert session that talks about some of these kind of, I wouldn't say novel interventions, but kind of clinical testing research applications of oscillometry, and increasingly used kind of type of lung function testing that's useful both in pediatrics and adult populations. So maybe check out some of those. It's not too late to register for those sessions. And then if you can't make it to everything, I know I stressed this before, but just think about adding on the on-demand package to your conference registration. $50 again if you're a member, or $75 for non-members. I think it's a great way to get more out of your conference experience.
All right, that's great. And thank you again. So thank you for walking us through the EOPH offerings for this coming May. And I just want to emphasize how much we appreciate your hard work, and also Tara's work. I know you guys are invisible, but in certain ways, but you're definitely the product of your work shine. So thank you so much, and I'll see you at the conference.
Likewise, thank you so much, Dr. McKell. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you for joining us today. To learn more, visit our website at thoracic.org. Find more podcasts from the ATS Assemblies on YouTube. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss a show.